everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another episode of Meta Monday. And this episode we'll be asking, is Cold Bloodlust OP? Now before we get started and jump into this episode, I want to explain real fast what I mean by overpowered, which is OP. Now a lot of people will say this, and whenever they say is a card OP, they essentially are saying, should this card be banned? That's almost always what they mean when they say OP or overpowered. Now, whenever I say that word, and how, in my play group, how we determine that is that card meta defining? Is that card maybe just a little too powerful, thus the term overpowered? And does it cause maybe it to warp the meta a little bit? Like, is that card just too hard to play around? And that is the question that we'll ask in episode 3 of Meta Monday. So first up, the first thing we'll do is we'll ask the question, what makes Cold Bloodlust good? And to first do that, we have to kind of explain. I'm going to pull the card up here. I want to explain to you guys what the card does and why this effect could be or could not be good. So here we go. So Cold Bloodlust is 1 yellow extra card that says counter play. If your leader card is Freeze's Army, the battle card played has its skill negated for the duration of the turn. Now, this is a very powerful effect, and essentially I wanted to kind of explain what this effect does. Now, when it says counter play, it means you can play this card in response or after an opponent plays their play card, plays a battle card. And then what this means is, in the way the game works, is after the counter timing happens, the counters actually take place before anything else does in that card's text. So if I play out, let's say Beerus, the 4-drop Beerus, I play out, and then you respond with Cold Bloodlust, I can choose to play, if I choose to play Cold Bloodlust, and essentially my counter effect happens before anything on Beerus takes effect. And what this means is I can negate its skills. Now, in Dragon Ball, a skill is essentially the entire text box of the battle card. And so if I Cold Bloodlust a Beerus, he loses his auto ability, and he also loses his double strike ability. So if I use this card on Beerus, he essentially becomes just a 20,000 attacker. Now, the answer to the question, is this good? Is this effect good? It is absolutely good. And it's actually extremely powerful. And it's an effect we've seen used more and more and more as the game has progressed. I think players are starting to understand how powerful this ability is. Some of the things that make this card good is it's good no matter what stage you play it in. You can play it on turn 1, and it's as devastating as if you played on turn 6 or 7. And for example, if your opponent plays like a 1-drop Broly to go search out a Broly, you can use Cold Bloodlust to just negate that effect. So they just essentially play out a 1-drop that does nothing. It's also really good later in the game too. If they play out, the 7-drop Beerus that comes in, General Demolition comes in, you can just play this card, and now he's just a 7-drop 20,000 a single attacker. It's very devastating no matter which aspect of the game you play it around. It's also impossible to play around, and what I mean by that is if your opponent has 1 yellow open, you just have to play something into it. And while you might not, play your biggest threat into it, you're still going to take this hit. You're still going to lose something when you play into this card. And that's very frustrating, as somebody that's playing against the card. You have to play out like your weaker threats first. But a lot of times in this game, all of your battle cards do something when they come into play. They either draw you cards or, KO something. And it stinks to lose that effect. And you're going to lose it too. You're just like, I'll play this out. Try to get as many as I can out of this hand so I can play my bigger threats. Also, the only counter to this is a card called Bad Ring Laser, which is a counter card. But the problem with this is that card is just highly it loses so much card disadvantage when you play this. And so you have to play out your card, plus play out this, and discard another card, just to stop, a 1-cost yellow card. That's very frustrating. And to make it, I think probably the biggest downside with this card is it's very splashable. You don't have to run, tons of yellow to play this card. It just needs 1 yellow to play. And for all those reasons, this card is extremely good. And, if someone comes up to me and says, hey, Dusty, is Cold Bloodlust good? My answer is always absolutely. Okay, so moving on. To the second part of this question, does Cold Bloodlust have a weakness? And now this is a very good question. Anytime we determine if a card is OP, we don't only have to determine if the card is good, because that's what everyone does, right? A lot of times people will kind of latch on to all the reasons why the card is good and completely ignore all the reasons why the card is bad, and they have kind of this inflated view of a card. So the first thing we'll say, the weaknesses to Cold Bloodlust. is it has to be played with a Frieza army leader. And this is a pretty big weakness, especially moving on to set 2, as all 3 spoiled leaders we've seen in set 2 don't have the Frieza army tag. And so, for those cool like drop zone manipulation for Meta Cooler, or the token generation for Chilled, if you want to play those kind of archetypes, you can't use this card. And that makes it very, you're never surprised by Cold Bloodlust, right? Whenever you set across from a Frieza's army leader, you know to expect it. If you're setting across from one that isn't, then you know not to expect it. So that is a pretty big weakness. Also, to kind of make up for this weakness, Ginyu is a Frieza army leader, and honestly, Ginyu is probably the best yellow leader, even in set 2. He can awaken himself. He has a lot of tools. He has tons of card advantage just built into his leader. And so, while it might seem like Yellow doesn't have a leader to play off of this in set 2, Ginyu is still going to be the poster boy of this card, and for good reason. He's a very, very good card. Next up, this can be Cold Bloodlust can be very weak against battle cards with strong permanent effects. And so a permanent effect is something that doesn't happen automatically. It's just something that when it's in play, it just always happens. Also, any kind of skill that is, I'm sorry, it's not a skill, it's a keyword. It's like double strike, triple strike. Cold Bloodlust kind of struggles against these cards a little bit as well, because while it does negate it for one turn, the next turn you just get that skill back. And so some examples of this is Indestructible. That's a new keyword we see coming in set 2. This is a powerful effect against the Cold Bloodlust decks, because they can take away Indestructible for your turn when you play the card, but you can just, play around that by just not putting your Indestructible threat in harm's way, and then next turn he's still Indestructible, and you can still take advantage of that permanent effect. Next up is a card like Lyda Hope Trunks. Lyda Hope Trunks, when it's in play, it gives that card and your leader 5,000 power, which is very strong. A lot of Cold Bloodlust decks struggle with leader interaction because they have no way to really stop the leader from doing damage. And so Lyda Hope Trunks can give your leader 5,000 power, and they can Cold Bloodlust it, but next turn you just get that 5,000 power right back. Another example is a 12-drop Whis, a battle card that is essentially immune to its skill box being negated. This is another type of battle card that kind of the Cold Bloodlust struggles against. Now, with 12-drop Whis, obviously, if your card struggles against a 12-drop, you're probably still okay, but it is a fact that we might see in future cards, and this is something to remember, that, if your skill box is protected or you have like a hexproof type effect, Cold Bloodlust will struggle against that type of card. Finally, Cold Bloodlust is pretty weak to battle cards being played on the Cold Bloodlust player's turn. And so for cards like Raging Attack of Vegeta, if you play it out, they can Cold Bloodlust it, but then their turn ends eventually, and he just comes back and he's ready to go on your turn. And that's very powerful. I think if we see more cards that can be played on your opponent's turn, then Cold Bloodlust will lose a lot of its power, because you can just play your threats on their turn and try to bait out Cold Bloodlust that way. Okay, and so finally, we'll move on to kind of the big question, which is Cold Bloodlust really too good, guys? Is that really a thing? And my answer to that is absolutely, it's too good. This is a card that is essentially just warping the meta. It's going to be, devastating in almost any way you look at it. And one of the big things I always talk about is we look at a lot of the cool set 2 archetypes that are coming, and you can take a card that you see there. For example, I hear a lot of people talking about the Priest card, the 7-drop Priest card, that essentially takes all your gods, puts them in energy. A lot of people talk about how excited they are to play this with Beerus, and I agree that deck looks so much fun to play. However, you play out Priest and your opponent just goes, Cold Bloodlust, and now you have kind of a lackluster body, and you lost your effect, and it just doesn't seem fun, right? It just seems like it's just too good. Your opponent just literally has to play a card. Second up, for a reason maybe it's a little too good, is, Cold Bloodlust is a good card on defense, right? So it's good to play and stop your opponent from double striking you, but it's also good to defend its threats. So if it has a very powerful card that has a permanent effect, and you play out a Beerus to kill it, they can just Cold Bloodlust to protect their threat. And so they kind of get to, the Cold Bloodlust player gets to protect their threats while shutting down all of yours. And this is, again, very scary. This is something that kind of makes it a little too good. They kind of get all the upside from Cold Bloodlust and none of the downside from kind of playing against it or, having to deal with it. Also, again, like we talked about before, there's no way to play around Cold Bloodlust, right? There's no way where you can just say, okay, if I have 5 energy or more, they can't use Cold Bloodlust, so I'll just not play any threats early game and wait until late game. You just literally have to play your threats into it. It hits every from turn 1 to turn 12, it hits everything. And that is very scary, and honestly just makes this card just a little too good. And finally, the card is splashable, guys. You know, you just because you run Ginyu doesn't mean you have to run a bunch of yellow cards. And I think early in the development of our meta, that's kind of why Cold Bloodlust didn't get to see a lot of play. A lot of the yellow cards are kind of lackluster right now. And while the card does have, or the collar does have some strong cards, it has, you know, like Mecha Frieza, to name, you know, one of the most powerful ones. You know, it just didn't really have enough colors to kind of devote so much. I'm sorry, not enough good cards to devote so much into yellow. But you know what a lot of players have done, you know, with Jordan Mackel's three color Ginyu list, is they just splash the yellow in, and that's very scary. And it's something that just honestly, all these things combined just really make Cold Bloodlust too good in my mind. And now last, I'll do this. I love doing this. Like I said, I'm a game designer at heart, so I love doing this. And that is, how could we fix this card? Now, the first thing I'll say, guys, is this card, and no card in this set is at all bannable. I've heard this word, you know, passed around a lot, and to me, a banned card is, or to ban a card is an emergency situation. It is something that actually physically breaks the game. And Cold Bloodlust does not break the game, it just defines the meta. It's something that you have to play around. It will make cards that maybe should be good, not good, because they can be Cold Bloodlusts. And like I said, that might be annoying, but it is in no way bannable. Please do not think that it needs to be banned. Next up is, I think what Cold Bloodlust really needs to fix it is just some silver bullet type effects. And what I mean by that is it's cards that kind of attack Cold Bloodlust. So maybe we'll see a card that says something like, all 1-cost counters cost 1 more to play. Maybe, you know, it's more battle cards that can't have their text box negated. I'm sorry, the skill box negated. Things like that. We need more silver bullet type effects to deal with Cold Bloodlust, so that way they are scared, you know, to be up against something, right? So it's just not a blanket card that hits everything. Next up is, and it's something that we've seen Bandai do, and that is we just need to limit the amount of Frieza leaders, Frieza's army leaders, which right now we only have 3 in the game. And like I said, Bandai has done a fantastic job by just making the next 3 leaders not Frieza army, so they can't splash in this Cold Bloodlust, which is great. And again, in future sets, if we see a very strong Frieza's army leader, then Cold Bloodlust just makes that leader even more strong. And so that's something we have to be really careful about. We don't want too many of those powerful Frieza army leaders. And then final up, we'll just kind of talk about maybe a little bit of design, some different ways they could have designed the card. This is just theory, guys, and I don't want them to rat the card by any means. It's just something I love to talk about. And something that our play group has talked a lot about is that the card probably should have just cost 2 yellow to play. This would have made it a lot harder to splash and have, you know, a real downside. It's a lot harder to keep up 2 energy than it is to keep up 1. And I think that, you know, making it 2 yellow would have really kind of maybe fixed the issue of it being, you know, splashable and just easy to use. Next up is, I think maybe they should have tied, if they kept it at 1 yellow, tied a discard effect to this. So it's something like, you know, you play Cold Bloodlust, you have to discard a card out of your hand, and that way you're losing a little bit of card advantage every time you use this. But you know, again, guys, I don't think this card is you know, overpowered in the sense that it needs to be banned. Again, we talked about it, you know, at the beginning of the video. Overpowered for me just means that it shapes the metagame. It takes the metagame, and you have to, you know, kind of play your threats and your cards around it. And in that sense, this card is absolutely overpowered and a very good card. You need to be aware of this card or find a way to fit this card into your deck if possible, because if you're not ready for this card, it will take, you know, multiple games off of you. All right, guys, so that's it for Meta Monday episode 3. Remember, guys, please leave your comments, your suggestions, anything you want me to see, you know, kind of talk about in these Meta Mondays in the comment section below. I love seeing your guys' comments, and I love, you know, bringing up your guys' suggestions and talking about it. Last thing I'll talk about, guys, is we are at almost 325 subscribers in 3 weeks. We are we have what already at 300 and a quarter, we have a quarter way into 400 subscribers, and I'll tell you guys, it's just overwhelming. I mean, you can tell I'm just like already kind of, you know, all flustered talking about it. It just means so much to you, and so much to me. When I made these videos, I wasn't sure how the response would be. I wasn't sure how good they would be, and you guys have just honestly just blown me away. I cannot just explain to you guys how much it means to me to have the love, the support of this community, of everybody. I get message daily, you know, people thanking me for doing these videos. And guys, honestly, it's overwhelming. I just cannot thank you guys enough. Like, thank you so much. I do have a special announcement that I'm going to announce during the Wednesday podcast. So if you want to see that, it's a Supercast video. You can check out the last episode. I'll have it at the end of the video. And you can also, you know, join us live Wednesday at KitchenTableMeta Twitch. and watch me and Aaron kind of do this podcast weekly. It's every Wednesday at 10 o'clock Eastern time. I will have a special announcement to talk about this week that I want to, it's an idea I have to kind of give back to the community for you guys giving me so much support. Like I said, guys, it just means so much to me. Thank you. I'm going to stop rambling on. I can sit here and talk so much. I can't say thank you enough. Anyway, guys, thank you again so much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow for Top 5 Tuesday, where we talk about the top 5 staple cards that you should have going into set 2. All right, guys, thank you so much again, and we'll see you tomorrow.